Let us then invite the final speaker in our deliberations. The roll falls to Senator the Honorable Maxine McLean, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Barbados. You've heard from her earlier today, yesterday, but she's returned now to provide you with the closing inspiration and the charge, so to speak, for the next such deliberations next year. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be back here with you. I did enjoy yesterday's session. While I was unable to be present for only one, I was able, to be present for only one of the sessions. I believe that the review of the colloquium's agenda demonstrates that the past 2 days' deliberations must contribute to the efforts of all here to review the many issues that influence the ability of the region in general, and more specifically, the private sector's capacity to contribute to the building of economic resilience. And in looking at your agenda and following information online, I was able to follow a bit in between sessions at the Senate this afternoon, and I think the opportunity for people across the region to follow the colloquium's deliberations was excellent. We would have discussed the term economic resilience, and by that I assume that you're applying a definition such as the following: the nurtured ability of an economy, and I stress nurtured, nurtured by persons such as yourself, of an economy to recover from or adjust to the effects of adverse shocks to which it may be inherently exposed. And I think this concept is used to provide an explanation as to why a number of inherently vulnerable countries have attained relatively high levels of gross domestic product per capita, among other indicators. For us, then, we can use this definition as we are seeking to find ways to actively influence the capacity of the region to enhance the performance of the private sector and its contribution to economic development. And you know, we like to cite one country often, and the world as well, often cites the successes of Singapore. And today I would also very briefly mention it, very specifically in relation to the concept I used just now, and that's all. Some of you may know the term Singapore paradox, and this refers to the contradiction that a country can be highly vulnerable, as many of our countries are, or should I say all the countries represented here are, in terms of the region. And this refers to the contradiction that a country can be highly vulnerable, as I said, but it can attain high levels of gross domestic product per capita. And let me hasten to say that for us, the objective should extend beyond GDP per capita to achieve growth and development that is inclusive, equitable, and that which enhances the quality of life of the region's people. I also, and I'm not going to be very long, folks, I know you have had 2 long days. I use this opportunity to acknowledge the decisions of the political directorate of the region to seek to consciously engage the region's private sector. COTED, for example, has initiated a process, and you would have heard of it yesterday, certainly while I was here. I heard mention of it, a process of reviving the region's umbrella representative body to ensure that the voice of the private sector is heard in the corridors of dialogue of the organs of CARICOM. Similarly, I congratulate the leadership and staff of Caribbean Export for taking the lead in these efforts. And I recall that in March 2013, at the inaugural Caribbean Exporters Colloquium, Caribbean Export also convened a meeting of an informal regional private sector advisory group, specifically to focus on directing how the sector engages with and provides guidance on several issues affecting the private sector and export competitiveness. And indeed, as I listened to the summation of the 2 days proceedings, I believe that the exercise, as you said, Pamela, is not about a seminar, but it is about doing a number of more critical things. Yesterday I used 2 words, advocacy and action. We are talking about policy and programming. So I also would recognize that resources have been allocated from the 10th EDF to support the work described above. And this hopefully will serve, among other things, to ensure that the regional private sector is able to capitalize on the many opportunities afforded by the EPA and manage those challenges. I actually, in my absence as such, would have gone through the content of the colloquium. And in looking at that and in listening to the summation of both Dr. Vincent and Mrs. Coke-Hamilton, recognized that you, in a very structured way, undertook a situation and analysis which allowed for critical assessment and evaluation and provided the scope for articulating a number of recommendations, as I said, relating to policy, programming, advocacy, and action. This, of course, would have been informed by a dialogue and an understanding of a number of critical key or critical success factors or critical factors over and beyond those categorized as critical CSFs. I think in the discussion, again, from listening to the summary and what I've been following, provides a number of important strategic options for achieving competitiveness and success. Critical inputs would have been issues such as renewable energy, maritime and air transport, and I will say something very quickly about that. As I came in the room, I heard mention of the word fast ferries, and then there was a distinguished panel here talking about, I think it was global logistics, the Caribbean and the new global logistics and shipping ecosystem. And I immediately recall something, it's become something of a mantra, and within the context of that very broad and critical area of concern, that is the Caribbean and the new global logistics and shipping ecosystem. Something I want to leave with you, and I think my friend Julia mentioned a challenge, and I want to throw out this challenge. Is something that I have become, I suppose, known. They may soon ask me to stop repeating it. But I believe that there are regional opportunities, and I say this because I spent, prior to coming into government, 15 years in the cruise industry. And I understand a little bit, and before that, I spent a year when I was young. Pamela, I have several years on you, so I hope that when we can discuss that. Your anniversary is one of mine, some years beyond yours. But what I am looking at is the fact that there are models that we need to adopt in the Caribbean which would allow us to mobilize financial resources. I spent 30 plus years as a member and as a volunteer in the credit union movement. And anybody who has any understanding of the history of the movement of the credit union movement in the Caribbean would recognize that we have achieved success in a phenomenal way across the Caribbean. However, and I appreciate that applause. However, my concern is that we have somehow lagged at what I call stage one in the development of the movement. Only yesterday I heard a presentation where somebody talked about $3 or $4 billion sitting in the, well, not sitting, because if you understand, the credit union is not sitting, but in the non-bank sector in Barbados alone. If you do a quick analysis, and the statistics are there, you would recognize that we have in the Caribbean the capacity among one element of our people, that is, well, one element of a financing proposal rather, billions of dollars that we can leverage. And I'm not talking about taking up funds in the institution, but perhaps using it as a means of investment, but that's a detail that we will talk about. But the point I'm making, if we talk about maritime transport, for example, I recommend to you a model that is used in Barbados right now to operate the Bridgetown Cruise Terminal, Inc. It's a private company, commercials as in others, owned by the government of Barbados through the Barbados Port, Inc., large corporate entities in Barbados, people who traditionally operated in the port, and individual shareholders like myself. And I can tell you that it is an investment that has paid dividends from the beginning until now. It is an opportunity. In fact, when the prospectus was prepared, it was oversubscribed. We therefore can look, as we talk about global logistics, to the question of intra-island, intra-regional transportation. Because as you mentioned, there are opportunities for services. One of those services, as you break down large shipments, et cetera, for distribution. How do we do that? And we can do that through mechanisms that are owned and controlled by the people of the Caribbean. And there are several options. I promise not to be long. That is one thing. The second one, of course, tied to that, as we look to solve the problems or offer solutions to move people and cargo, we can do that in a way that facilitates business travel and what I call recreational travel, while at the same time providing an opportunity for moving food and other kinds of produce and other goods across the region. What I said a couple of days ago, and you remember this, Pamela, is that there was a gentleman called Marcus Garvey, and I have a share certificate that my grandfather invested in the Black Star liner. He was probably a man before his time. That is my grandfather and Marcus Garvey, but the concept was there. And I'm going to age myself a bit. When my older brother went to Mona, he probably went upon the what do you call it, the federal maple or the federal palm. So it's a concept where there are modern options that can facilitate that, because as we talk about global participation, we have to successfully participate regionally before we do that. And therefore, my challenge is, as I've said on most occasions, to policymakers, but I throw it out now to the private sector. Partner with government and the individual citizens of this country to create new financing mechanisms, and one such mechanism or one such investment possibility is to address, in part, maritime transportation. And I can tell you that properly studied and done with some creative thinking in terms of what exists out there or what can be constructed, and I'm not thinking strictly of a fast ferry, because that may not take us from the farthest south to the highest, point in the north. But if we look at those things, we can use those models. There are financial resources sitting in the region. There's intellectual capacity. I don't need to tell you about that. And there are so many opportunities which we need to look for. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me. And I trust that I will see, and I know Mrs. Hamilton, and I anticipate that we can continue the dialogue, but more importantly, engage in the results of the dialogue for the people of the region. Thank you very much.